I'm here today in Sale Street in Lambeth to meet up with Marc Vlessing, who's the co-founder of Pocket Living. Pocket are developers of affordable compact housing aimed at singles and couples who are often priced out of the market but haven't got access to social housing. So we're having this chat in Sale Street in Lambeth. Can you tell me a bit about it and how you've worked with the local council and how it fits into your portfolio?
So this scheme is now 3 years old and was one of our early modular schemes. It's a piece of land that abuts a council estate, and the local authority, Lambeth in this case, had tried variously to find ways of getting the local residents to find acceptance in a development on this small piece of land, but it had become very difficult, and in part because people were worried about noise and dust, didn't particularly like open market housing on the site. So a pocket flat being a restricted income home for people on a certain salary immediately was more acceptable. Secondly, we then prioritised people whose parents lived on the estate. But the thing that made the biggest difference in the consultation process, and actually we then got it through consultation as a land sale fairly quickly, was the fact that we committed early on to making it a modular scheme, thus dust-free and relatively noise-free, and the fact that we could genuinely commit to being on and off the site much faster than with the conventional build. And that's exactly what happened. We completed this building within 11 months, whereas normally it would have been a year and a half. In fact, there are 2 buildings on this estate, pocket buildings on this estate. So in total, from memory, I think it's 70 plus homes. And they sold very quickly. I mean, as you can imagine, this site is within 15, 20 minutes walk of the Houses of Parliament. So it's as central as it gets. I don't think we could afford to buy land in this place anymore today. From the local authority's point of view, the fact that what we build is not unrestricted open market housing, and that it does have a very clear affordability framework, which we police to an inch of its life. I mean, you buy a pocket flat, you sign up to a lifelong commitment that you will only sell to somebody who, like you, is on a restricted income. And that gives a local authority an assurance that the housing will continue to remain for the people that it was intended for from day one.
Very good. So all your sites so far have been in London, I think. Are you looking outside London now, particularly post-COVID?
Yeah, so we are looking outside London. We have now for a while. We're having very good conversations with Cambridge. We've had conversations with Bristol and Oxford as well, but Cambridge looks to be the front runner. Watford could be interesting. Clearly, the level of priced outness for people at the beginning of their housing journey in London is such that they're having to leave London. And so in a sense, whilst there are enough opportunities for us to continue building in London, the land is getting more and more expensive for us as well, and therefore we need to follow our cohort to where they will next be, and they are moving out of London, not more, I would say, than they used to historically, but definitely the trend is growing towards looking at places outside of Zone 6. Of course, the transport links are getting so much better as well.
But also there is a conversation, Emma Duncan was writing in the Times the other day, that actually London might get younger as a result of COVID-19, and won't that be good for you if that happens?
I think there are all kinds of positives from the experience that London is going through. Yes, there's no doubt. I mean, rental costs have come down fairly significantly in the last 18 months. There are some places in London where medium income earners would not be able to rent even 2 years, a year and a half ago, and they can afford to today. So, London goes through these cycles. I remember the days when London barely had 6.5 million inhabitants, now kicking against 10 million. So I'm sure that there will be a reset possible for younger people in London for a while. The question is, post-Brexit and post-COVID, how does London re-establish itself in the international community? There was a rather worrying piece the other day suggesting that within the uber prime, the most expensive housing, London had attracted more purchasers in the last 12 months than any other world city, despite the fact that many of these people haven't been able to visit London or look at the homes that they're buying. So this idea of London as the big magnet, the big draw for the international community, I think it does tend to get in the way. We don't necessarily think about the effects of the very rich buying in London on the target market that is pockets, but of course it is, a ladder of values which, if the top end becomes overvalued, eventually everything becomes more overvalued within its class.
But you're doing a development in Barking, which is changing very fast, but is actually the lowest values in London, I think, in terms of housing, and you're putting in hyper-optic Wi-Fi and so much of 900 megabits per second, which is pretty impressive, isn't it? But that will attract younger people back into the city. Darren Rodwell always used to say to people that don't go to Berlin, come to Barking, and he's for artists looking for studios. Do you see places like Barking leading the way in terms of...
I think Darren has got this one absolutely right. I mean, I think there are very imaginative things going on in that part of London, and we're very proud to have launched a building there. It's a very, very beautiful building. You're right, it does have all kinds of great advantages in terms of working from home, so super fast broadband, we've got a green room, we've got workspaces. It's a different type of development from the ones in our more inner London locations, and the price point is one of the lowest we've ever created, 195, 200,000 pounds onwards. So that is attracting a slightly different crowd from the one that we normally attract in zones 3 and 4. And I'm very pleased that we're doing it. It behoves a company that takes public funding not to turn down any part of London. So we are generously backed by the GLA and Homes England, and I felt it was very important when there was a leader of Darren's vision in Barking that we should respond to that. But it undoubtedly will be one of our less profitable schemes because the margins are just that much thinner. And that's one of the big problems for all developers, that you put a huge amount of effort wherever you go. None of this stuff is simple. And if you can make a much higher margin elsewhere, well, why wouldn't you do that? So I think one of the most fascinating things about running Pocket is that we do sit between the public and the private, and we're always having to find that balance between, making a fair return in the right places, but balancing out the needs of London more broadly in the way we do that.
So your partners with related companies, they're one of the biggest developers in the US. What does that mean for Pocket's future?
They have clearly given us the opportunity to raise more money because they're sitting there as a big organisation behind us. And it gives financiers comfort to know that we're now majority owned by Related. They very much run on a partnership principle. So once you get to a certain level within Related, your voice will be heard. And they run quite an open, plural senior management team. So I'm learning huge amounts from their guys in America who are working on multidisciplinary projects, some of them very, very large indeed, but some of them actually perfectly scaled to what we're doing. So that's interesting because as this is the third end of the stream which I'm working, possibly the fourth even by some, judgment. And I've always found that America has been a really inspiring place to look at in order to refresh one's thinking back in the UK. Related had the unique advantage of not just being a scaled large organisation, but also having a deep heritage in affordable housing. So they are one of the largest owners of affordable housing in the United States. And they wanted to invest in us because we were doing something which they recognised from within their affordable housing culture was different and was bringing the private and the public together in a new concept aimed at the starter market, and nobody was doing that even in America. So there's a lot of synergy for us, but we're tiny within their organisation.
So you've always focused on good design as one of the reasons why you can actually create more compact living, and you're also now leading the field in terms of modular construction. Does modular allow you to provide better quality housing as well as housing at pace?
Yeah, I think modular has untold advantages if you get it right. We haven't always got it right, and there are genuine risks in using modular. So, you are literally handing over the keys to your project to the factory owner in the hope that, X months later, the lorries arrive with the units on the back. And if that doesn't go right, you can't just sack the brickie or the spark or the carpenter to correct it, because you're in the hands of a single unique system approach. So there are real risks in it, and relationship matters hugely. As an industry, modular is highly undercapitalized still. It is in its infancy, and there are still too many operators out there for whom pricing the market is more tempting than pricing the product. And that's, of course, a bit of an issue, because, what you want from modular is that eventually what you're paying for is the product and not the particular supply-demand equation at that moment in time. So, strictly speaking, my view is that because a pocket flat is a pocket flat and it's always the same, I should be paying the same price for my modular units from 1 year to the next, maybe with a bit of inflation built in. That's not quite the way it's working yet. And I think until we get to an industry that is more scaled, there is going to be that mismatch. Now, that may change over time, and it jolly well should, but it will require some very nifty public-private partnerships to bring that about.
And how do you actually build them? Are they CLT or
No, these are still volumetric. They are literally entirely autonomous structures with all the integrity that they need to carry the next load, the next load, the next load. And the tallest modular building that we've done actually for a while was Europe's tallest modular building. It's 24 stories in Wandsworth, a place called Mapleton Crescent, and it's a very beautiful building. And it shows that it's perfectly possible to create genuine diversity and form out of modular. I'm very proud of the team's achievements there. But what we've learned is that there are different modular solutions for different sites. So for some sites, you want heavy steel, others light gauge, others maybe you do want cross-laminate timber, others you want panelized. And as we grow and become more and more sophisticated in this space, our attitudes are slightly changing. And I think the future for us is one in which we will try and develop the IP that sits behind our modular approaches, and then hopefully go to fabricators out there and say, here's our design, here's our IP, can you build that for us? And then bring some competition to the marketplace, because hopefully by that stage there will be enough fabricators out there who can compete for those contracts, rather than for us having to go to a modular provider who has their own integrity, it's a system with their own integrity. Because I think some of the modular projects that I look back upon, we probably ended up with systems that were far too heavy duty for the needs of the particular site.
So just one last point, you mentioned a tall tower that you built in Wandsworth, and this is what Robert Gendrick would call gentle density. Do we need tall buildings in London, do you think, in order to get density in more difficult sites like in Wandsworth, or can we deliver these lower houses still and provide the density that you're going to need?
No, we absolutely need everything. London is a city of such complexity and diversity that to try and strap yourself to one particular ideological view of height and density is madness. And I don't actually think that that's what Gendrick or anybody in politics is aiming at. I think it's perfectly reasonable to be having a debate about, you know, what the best type of housing may look like. But you know, we built between sort of 1820 and 1900 more 2x2, two-storey terraced strings of development across London. That's what your problem is. It's all very well to get excited by 6-storey middle-rise density like Freiburg or Amersfoort in Holland, but these are towns which either had very serious problems at the end of the Second World War and therefore needed to be essentially rebuilt, or they kept expanding on their outer. They were not very large cities to start with. To bring 6-storey density to zones 3, 4, 5, well, that game's up. You know, there's not enough land to do it. So I'm convinced that we need height and density within the core of London, and I'm convinced that 6-storey density in the outer levels of the donut is very appropriate.
Good. Well, Mark, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for showing me around Sale Street, and I look forward to looking at more of your schemes, because you're producing quite a lot at the moment, aren't you?
Well, we are. Thank you, Peter. And we are. Christ, we are.